Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched KAOS. Let's talk about it. So KAOS has come in the nick of time, literally perfect timing. Just when I was dying from boredom for what Hollywood has had to offer us here in 2024. I have largely been unimpressed by this year's releases, and there haven't been enough of them to keep me on my toes. Now that's a whole different discussion for a video that's coming up real soon, diving into what we have gotten so far out of Hollywood. But as I said, this series couldn't have come at a better time, because just when I was about to give up and give in, here comes Charlie Covell giving us a brand new Netflix series. Now, Charlie Covell is already famous for giving us The End of the Effing World just a few years back, and they also created this series, which clearly has the same sort of DNA attached to it. But I have to say, my thoughts on KAOS are largely coloured by the fact that I was so bored and largely unimpressed by what we have gotten so far out of the entertainment industry in 2024. That and the fact that this series is based off of Greek myth. And if you guys have been around for a minute, then you know how I feel about Greek mythology. I love Greek mythology. I grew up watching Hercules. That movie taught me the English language, okay? So Greek myth is a huge deal to me, and I've always thought that Hollywood has grossly underused this plethora of stories, of myth, of lore that they could dive into for various projects. They've largely ignored it for some reason. But here comes Charlie Covell giving us a brand new project based off of these myths. And if you want to hear my thoughts on how that went, then keep on watching. But before we dive into all of that good stuff, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now, without further ado, guys, let's get into this. So as I said, KAOS is based off of ancient Greek myth, but it is set in a modern world, in an alternate reality where people are still worshipping the ancient Greek gods of Mount Olympus. And so here you have Zeus and his siblings, Poseidon, Hades, his sister wife, Hera. You know, all of the main gang are featured here. And in terms of the world itself, down on the ground you have modern day Greece, but this alternate reality where people are still worshipping the ancient Greek gods. They're still praying to them, and they're still making human sacrifices in their name. Now this story begins on a very important day of worship. It might be Zeus's name day or something, where they are paying tribute to him, they are worshipping him, and they are even offering him a human sacrifice. But it's a very big deal down on the ground in modern day Greece, and people are practicing these religious traditions that are all designed to honor and worship the ancient Greek gods. And very early on in the series, you get to meet these Greek gods, who are all led by none other than Jeff Goldblum's Zeus. Zeus is lapping up the attention. He loves it when the people are worshipping him and are fearful of the gods, because that's how he maintains power and control. But there seems to be a couple of blips. I mean, Zeus has this like circular waterfall, which we initially think is like a waterfall of life or something, but it has a certain blip to it, which he thinks might be his imagination initially. But there are more anomalies along the line that start to make him feel extremely paranoid. And that is because there is a prophecy that foretells his downfall and that of his family. And if you know anything about Zeus's backstory, you know that he would take such a prophecy very seriously, because he himself brought about the downfall of his own father, Kronos. So all is not well in this heavenly dreamscape of Mount Olympus, because as the series goes on, Zeus becomes increasingly paranoid, increasingly fearful, and acting crazy and foolish out of his paranoia because of the signs of this prophecy perhaps coming to pass. But in the meantime, on the ground, we have the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. No, that's a different mythology. But we do have 3 human characters that each have a role to play in this prophecy, because in this world and reality, each person is born with a prophecy, and it tends to be something cute or small, but sometimes it's something major, like you will kill your father or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like, haven't we all been there? But there are 3 humans that we're introduced to throughout the series that share the same prophecy, and that is the prophecy that Zeus is most afraid of, that will bring about the downfall of himself and his family. So this is the classic case of being introduced to several different characters who at the surface of things seem pretty separate and unrelated, but they all have a certain thread. Oh, shout out to the fates! They have a certain thread connecting them to one another, and this thread is of course this prophecy. And so throughout the series we see how they become even more interconnected, and we see how their actions, whether intentionally or unintentionally, lead them to fulfilling said prophecy that Zeus is so terrified of. And of course, as is classic in ancient Greek literature, we also have the prevalence of a self-fulfilling prophecy, especially in Zeus's part, because the more paranoid he becomes, the more terrified he is that this prophecy foretelling his end will come about, the more he makes moves towards that very same prophecy. The actions that he takes to prevent this from happening end up ensuring that it will. Now, whilst this prophecy of Zeus's end is the overarching story that connects all of the characters together, we also have some smaller storylines here and there, which I'll go through really quickly when I dive into each of the characters. But first of all, I just wanted to talk about my thoughts on the overall story, and as you can probably guess, like I'm a fan. Like I am literally a fan. I just thought it was so brilliantly put together. I mean, it helps that you have such rich lore to dive into, which is what I've been advising Hollywood to do for many, many years now. But yeah, it helps when you have incredible lore and mythology already there on the page, and you can just kind of pick at that and bring it into the modern day. And we've seen people do this before. I mean, the series overall has a very Neil Gaiman vibe, so much so that I actually thought it was created by Neil Gaiman initially, although controversially nowadays for several reasons. But no, it is in fact created by Charlie Covell, and like I said, it does have that same sort of DNA as The End of the Effing World, but it also definitely has similarities to American Gods, right, and even Good Omens. Like, it has that vibe where it's very quirky and very different, but it dives into an immense amount of lore that can be a little bit overwhelming, but it does a good job of breaking it up into digestible chunks and keeping up the energy and entertainment factor, and giving us characters that are really charismatic and likable to root for. And the clever part is that you have specific characters that are chosen from, I mean, just acres and acres of mythology, to give you an entry point into this story. Of course, you have the big 3 with Zeus, Poseidon and Hades, but you also have Hera and Persephone, and of course Prometheus, who acts as the somewhat unreliable narrator of the entire story. I think the choice of the characters that we got in this season was really clever, and they were the perfect characters to kind of give us an entry point into this world. And that also goes for the human characters on the show as well, who share the same names as some characters in ancient Greek myth, but they aren't actually the same because they are based in this, you know, alternate reality in a modern world. But you have characters like Orpheus and Cassandra and Eurydice, and it's just really fun to have those name drops, but they also have compelling stories in their own right for us to follow through. Okay, so now I'm going to go through some of the main characters from the series, and we're going to dive into my thoughts on them, starting off with Mr. Goldblum himself. Oh, round of applause. Round of applause. He did a phenomenal job. Now listen, okay? Jeff Goldblum, He's a legend, he's an icon, but he's also one of those actors that he doesn't have a lot of range. He doesn't have a lot of range. You kind of know what you're getting when you get Jeff Goldblum on a project, but when he is perfectly cast in something, like when he is right for the material and used well, he is just an immaculate fit. And I think it's the case here. It's definitely giving Thor Ragnarok, where it's just perfect. Like, it's literally just perfect to have him in the role as Zeus. Now, initially I thought it was perfect because he's zany, carefree, sassy, and he has those Jeff Goldblum isms that he always does, and it fits in perfectly for the character. Initially I thought that was already good enough. Like, that was keeping me entertained 100%. It was definitely worth all of the zeros on his paycheck that he likely got for being the sort of poster child for this entire project. So already I was like, this is great. This is phenomenal. This is amazing. This is wonderful. But then as the series goes on, you have Zeus become increasingly paranoid and insecure, and then a different side of him emerges where you remember, like, oh yeah, Zeus is Zeus is the king of the gods, but like in a terrifying way. Because initially it was like, oh, he's just some guy who's living it up in, like, I don't know, Tampa, Florida, or Miami or somewhere, and he was just living a life of luxury, wearing gaudy Versace and sipping on his drinks. Like, that was the air, that was the aura that he had initially, and I thought that was a really fun take on Zeus. I mean, we've seen many iterations of this character, and we've seen more serious versions, we've seen outlandish versions, like, speaking of Thor, I mean, we saw Russell Crowe even attempt a version of Zeus. Like, we've seen this character in many different ways and many different faces, and I thought Jeff Goldblum's take on this character was hilarious. I thought it was so charismatic and a perfect fit for his Jeff Goldblum persona. But then as the episodes go on, where he reveals that different side, where he's angrier, he seeks vengeance, he's vicious, he's cruel, he's so flipping cruel. And I didn't expect Jeff Goldblum to be able to pull that other side off, that darker side. I mean, this is a dark comedy after all, and a lot of the darkness comes from him, especially in the latter episodes. And he pulls it off completely. There's a scene that takes place near the end where they're having a sort of family meeting, talking about how Zeus has lost his goddamn mind and he needs to reel it in, and then Zeus himself makes an appearance and he starts setting new rules, because it turns out that that little water fountain, that circular fountain, isn't just any old decorative feature in the gardens of Olympus. It's actually the fountain of immortal waters or whatever that provides the gods with their immortality. That's the stuff that they've been sipping on all throughout the series, and it's the life force of all of the people that are in the underworld. And so here you have Zeus handing out glass bottles, being like, you're gonna get rationed now. You're getting rations of water because you guys have been taking the mick. And he goes so far as to even kill Dionysus's cat. Dionysus's little kitty, Denny. That moment was just horrifying and cruel to me. And it's crazy because, of course, we saw him kill a bunch of real human beings earlier. We saw him kill a bunch of pool boys earlier when he had lost his watch. But the cat scene was just so cruel. And so yes, I think Jeff Goldblum did a great job of pulling off both sides, or all different sides of this character, because just when you thought he was just weird and wacky and Jeff Goldblum-y, that dark side emerged as he became increasingly paranoid and terrified that his power was slipping through his fingers. And you even have Prometheus explaining that when he destroyed his father, as is the case in Greek myth, he absorbed his father's soul, and so those like dark tendencies and that thirst and lust for power is starting to emerge, and Zeus is constantly battling it out against that part of his soul, and clearly by the end of the series he has lost that battle. So then next up you have another favorite of mine in Janet McTeer's Hera. Hera was such a doll. Hera was such a queen. I really liked this iteration of Hera. Like I said, we've seen tons and tons of different versions. I mean, speaking of Disney's Hercules, the movie that basically raised me into loving Greek myth, that version of Hera was definitely fictional. That version of Hera was pretty much unrecognizable to the version that we get in actual ancient Greek myth. She was much nicer, much friendlier, more jovial and kind and motherly, whereas real life Hera from myths was like vengeful. She was cruel, but she was also tired of being smited and embarrassed and humiliated by Zeus and his many mistresses. And so here we have more echoes of that version of Hera that's truer to Greek myth. So much so that she even turned all of Zeus's mistresses into bees, and she has a whole hive. She has a whole hive of them because he is a man whore. But yeah, I love this version of Hera, especially her costuming. I thought she looked so glamorous, so cool. She herself is keeping secrets because one, she's sleeping with Poseidon, who by the way is her other brother. She's Zeus's sister. What? She's Zeus's sister wife. Poseidon is her other brother. This whole situation is effed up, but that's Greek myth for you. And then the second secret is, of course, that she has been in cahoots with Poseidon because she has also been concerned about Zeus's power-hungry way. And they both recognize when he is losing his goddamn mind, especially after that scene with Hades. Oh my goodness, where he smites Hades and he lights his ass up on fire. That was horrible. That was so humiliating for Hades, and it was just terrible. And so yeah, that's when Hera and Poseidon are side-eyeing Zeus majorly, being like, uh-oh, we have a problem. So they are both in cahoots, even though Hera denies it. And it just makes for a very interesting dynamic between the siblings, who are the leaders of Mount Olympus, and are also extremely incestuous. And then you have David Thewlis as Hades, and he's a very different take on Hades. He's if Hades was portrayed by the Shea Monster. Like he is a very demure, very mindful. No, but he's definitely more downplayed. He's not quite as ostentatious and bullish as we've seen Hades be portrayed previously. I mean, in the Disney version, he's an iconic character and that has a huge personality, very boisterous, very charismatic and zany. And even in both live action adaptations of Percy Jackson, Hades has been portrayed in a very similar way. So this is a completely different direction for Hades. He's very small, very anxious. He's definitely over his job of being the lord of the underworld. And when he's in the presence of Zeus, he cowers, you know, he makes himself even smaller. And it's only his wife, who is portrayed by Reiki Ayola, who stands up for him and who wants him to achieve great things and do good things with the underworld. And again, you even have a very different take on Persephone in this series, because in ancient Greek myth, she was in Hades involuntarily because Hades himself had trapped her there, and she was only able to leave, I think it was during spring, and that's why we get the spring season, and that's where she would visit her mother and the land of the living, and then she would be back, you know, back in hell for most of the year. Whereas in the show, Persephone is kind of like a co-CEO, you know, she's helping Hades run the joint and she wants better for him. She clearly loves him and wants him to stand up to his brother. But after that horrifying scene where he is smited by Zeus, all she can do is really comfort him, because I mean, if you can hurt a god, then that just shows you how powerful Zeus really is. So they have to tread very lightly. But that doesn't stop her from taking steps, okay? Just kind of pushing the envelope just a little bit, including allowing Orpheus to return to the land of the living and drag along his deceased wife. That's something that she was absolutely not supposed to do, but she had had enough of Zeus. She said, F that man, I'm gonna do it anyway. And honestly, I love that for her. Now, like I said, we also have Prometheus Prometheus, who is our somewhat unreliable narrator for the whole series, and he is also Zeus's bestie who betrayed him, or at least Zeus believes so, and so now he is stuck in an eternity of pain and torture, hanging up on a cliffside while being pecked in the side by birds, and that is accurate to the mythology. But he's kind of taking us on this journey. All the while, he is pulling strings in the background as best as he can to try and take down Zeus. He wants this prophecy to happen. He's like, enough is enough. These birds are hurting me. I'm over it. And so he wants the prophecy to take place, and he is pulling some strings in the background to make sure that happens. Now, Zeus's son Dionysus also helps facilitate the prophecy, but it's unbeknownst to him because he actually wants to get his father's approval. You know, he is stuck being the god of pleasure and overindulgence, and he's sick of it. Like, he's this club kid who's had enough, okay? He wants more responsibilities. He wants to get promoted, and he thinks the way that he can do this is by helping a mortal to go into the underworld and take his wife back into the land of the living. For some reason, he thought that would be a good idea. I don't know. I felt like that part of the story was a little bit convoluted, but it didn't quite make sense for Dionysus to think that that would help him get into his father's good graces. It's not just the fact that it seemed naive, because he is naive as a character, but it just seemed out of character for him because he felt like he was useless and he didn't have a purpose as the god of pleasure and whatnot. But that doesn't really translate to him automatically wanting to help someone else and doing it in the name of love. That was a bit of a leap that didn't quite make sense to me character-wise. But in the end, all of Dionysus's actions that were supposed to get him his father's approval and perhaps even a promotion just end up ensuring that all of the pieces fall in place for the prophecy to happen. I understand the metaphor, I understand the meaning of the story and the fact that Dionysus wanted his father's love and approval, and that was the first step that he took. But it didn't really make sense for Zeus to be that obtuse to the fact that Dionysus took the watch, because literally earlier on in that day, he had been showing off his watch to Dionysus, being like, look, my favorite son Hercules gave this to me, and then all of a sudden it magically went missing. And Zeus wasn't like, isn't it crazy how I've had this watch for eons, and the one time when I show it to Dionysus, it goes missing? 1 + 1 equals, but no, nothing clicked. And so a bunch of men died for absolutely no reason. Okay, so now let's dive into the human characters real quick, starting us off with Eurydice, who is one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, or should I say 3 horsemen of chaos. Ooh, because she of course is assigned that very same prophecy, and she will bring about the end of Zeus somehow. Now, when we first meet her, she's unhappily married to Orpheus, who is like a famous like singer who sings like gospel music for this world, but in the vein of like Imagine Dragons. Like, it's giving Imagine Dragons, it's giving Bastille, it's giving Coldplay. Like, that's the vibe that Orpheus is giving, but just church songs. Like, but unfortunately, Eurydice is just not feeling it. Like, she's sick and tired of being his muse. She's over the music, and so she wants to leave Orpheus, and she ends up going to one of the temples where her mother is actually a sort of sister, like a sort of nun, but her tongue has been cut off because she's a nun of Hera. So her mother can't actually talk to her, and it's really sad because she goes to her mother for advice, but she can't actually give her that advice. She's just supposed to listen. And all the while, Hera is listening to all of the deepest, darkest secrets and darkest thoughts that these people are conveying to each of these nuns. So unfortunately, her mother kind of gave up her life in service to Hera, and she can't really be there for her daughter the way that Eurydice needs her. But Eurydice expresses her desire to leave Orpheus, and also she denounces the gods because it took her mother away from her. Well, alas, she shouldn't have done that, because the second that she leaves the temple, she ends up getting run over and die. But it's when she lands in the underworld that she meets Caeneus. Was it Caeneus? I don't know how to pronounce that name, but it's another prophecy, bro. They share the same prophecy and are due to play a part in the downfall of Zeus somehow. And it's here that it's revealed that, you know, all of the people who are dying and being sent to the underworld, they believe that they're going towards this renewal renewal. And if they pass through this frame and devote their lives to the gods and believe in them and worship them and Zeus and all of that, then they will have this renewed life, the second chance at life. But in reality, when they pass through the frame, they end up in this abyss at the end of time where their souls are sucked out in order to power the immortality of the gods, hence that circular fountain. Now, whilst Eurydice is making all of these discoveries, she also somehow has time to fall in love with Caeneus, but they end up starting something new, and I have to admit that was one of my least favorite parts of the series. Like, I was not invested in that love story whatsoever, and just in general, Eurydice was a tricky character for me, because whilst I was invested in her relationship with her mother and the fact that her mother had abandoned her to become one of Hera's nuns, that was all great stuff. On the flip side, with her marriage with Orpheus and the fact that she just like hated him so much made no sense to me, because initially I expected Orpheus to be a huge asshole. I expected him to be the worst of the worst, an absolute dickhead, because when we're introduced to her, she's like, oh, I hate being married to him, I'm in his shadow, blah, blah, blah. But then as the episodes go on and you're following Orpheus on his heroic journey, making this Heraclean effort to find his wife in the underworld and get her back to the land of the living, I'm just like, how can you hate this guy? Like, it's kind of crazy that she hates him so much. And yeah, he did take away her coin, like he shouldn't have done that, but he didn't want her to pass through the flame and get her renewal. And in the end, he saved her life, or her afterlife, because that renewal stuff was BS anyway. So like, I didn't understand the hate for Orpheus. He was a bit annoying, but she could have just gotten a divorce, no? Like, she could have just divorced him. She didn't have to go through all of that. And so yeah, I wasn't invested in her relationship with Caeneus. I think his name is Caeneus. I think it is actually. Didn't really care about that, I'm afraid. But I was, of course, interested in how they would play a role in the demise of Zeus. And so in the end, Caeneus's part seems to be in the underworld, because he has the unique ability to restore the souls that have been taken away once they pass through the frame. Even Hades wasn't able to do that, but somehow Caeneus can, and so that's the part that he needs to play. And finally, we have Ariadne. Ariadne, who had my favorite of the human stories in this series. She is part of this powerful political family. Her father is the president of this version of Greece, and he is a staunchly religious man and also kind of a dictator. I don't know what's going on there. But it doesn't look like a lot of democracy was involved, which is ironic, right? But unbeknownst to Ariadne, more than just one prophecy has destroyed her life. It's not just the one that she has and that she's also shared with Caeneus and Eurydice, but it's also her father's prophecy. That was a huge reveal, but let's rewind a little bit here, because all her life, Ari has had the guilt, the weight of the absolute guilt over killing her brother when she was just a baby, because she was told that when she was a baby, she rolled over on her brother and ended up killing him. Now, she was a fighter. She was more aggressive. She was feisty right out of the womb, and she came into the world screaming while her brother was blue and unable to breathe. And that was something that Ari had had to face for her entire life. All the while, she had to portray the perfect daughter to the rest of the world, even when she disagreed with her father's policies against the Trojans, for instance, because that's a whole different situation going on, where they're a minority group that are oppressed in this version of Greece. They are completely oppressed in this society, and that's something that Ari is against, and she tries to speak up for them, but her father won't listen because he's taking direct orders from Poseidon. So all of that was already compelling. It already had me on the edge of my seat, but that was before we even got to the twist. That was before we even got to the major twist about this family, because it turns out that Ari didn't kill her twin brother as she'd been told her whole life. Instead, her father had lied about it, because his prophecy was that he would be taken down, he would be killed by his first child, or at least the first child to draw breath. Oh My goodness. And it turns out that it wasn't even his son that first drew breath. It was his daughter who came into the world screaming. Ah! That was insane. That was such a phenomenal, brilliant piece of writing. Phenomenal piece of writing. Did not see that coming whatsoever. Fell out of my chair. That was genius. And that entire episode was insane because not only do we learn the twist about the prophecy, but we also learn that Ares' brother Glaucus isn't even dead. He's been alive this entire time and he has been kept in the cellars as the Minotaur. He is the Minotaur. What? They turned him into a monster. They tortured this poor boy and he grew up to be a man who just like ravaged and savaged and tortured a bunch of Trojans whenever they needed him to. It's so freaking heartbreaking, but man, that episode was just absolutely elite. And so that entire storyline surrounding Ari and her family, yeah, that was just top tier storytelling, excellent writing, and also performances and characterizations all around, and definitely the best human story that we got from the show. Okay, so I could go on and on and on. Like I said, Greek myth is an extremely dense and rich source material to draw from, and this series definitely breaks it down into digestible chunks, but there's still so much. Like, I'm just now remembering all of the different storylines on this show, and it's just so brilliant, and the way that it's so intricately woven together is masterful. I had the time of my life with this series. And production wise, I also thought that this series was very strong. I thought the cinematography was brilliant. I loved seeing such a vibrant, almost technicolor Olympus. It's such a feast for the eyes when we get to have those scenes with Jeff Goldblum and his garish tracksuits. And then you have Hera running around with her, you know, elegant and beautiful chartreuse outfits and her massive Gucci sunglasses. Like, it's just such a vibe. And even the scenes on Earth are also gorgeous. It's not quite as vibrant and technicolor. They don't do that awful thing where everything is like grey and desaturated, which we often actually get from Neil Gaiman projects, but here it's very colourful and very intentional with its use of colour, until of course we get to the underworld, which is very intentionally monochromatic. Like, I just think all of that is great stuff. And like I said, the performances are brilliant all around. The costumes, production design, the sets, everything is just really well put together. And even though there are some storylines that I thought were weaker than others, as I mentioned, overall, this is a project that I am definitely excited about. And I hope of all hopes that Netflix doesn't abandon this one. Netflix has been on a losing streak lately when it comes to cancelling shows, especially quirky and different shows that kind of think outside of the box. I really, really hope this series does well, because I need a season 2, because it ended on a cliffhanger. It ended perfectly where they gave us just enough for one season, but also left enough on the table to get us excited for a follow-up. But Netflix needs to greenlight the follow-up. Like, we need to get a season 2 for this. So guys, let's get to watching. Let's bring up that watch time to in the billions, because Netflix is lethal and cruel when it comes to its cancellations of shows, and I really do be needing a second season of this one. So with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving KAOS an 8.5 out of 10. So that's it from me, guys. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on KAOS, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of the series down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.